Hey guys, it's Sam, and I'm here with the wonderful Leigh Bardugo, my favorite author of the Grisha Trilogy and Six of Crows. Yes, I've been very excited about this. I've put it very hush hush to people because I didn't want to like jinx it.
Oh my god.
So yes, this is very exciting for me. So we are here at Yallfest. We're in a very intimate setting.
Hello.
You know, very romantic, very
It is.
lobster.
It is.
So we're going to be talking about some few things, some older things and some newer things coming.
Also, organized crime.
Right.
Ooh, our drinks have arrived.
First thing I want to talk about is Image has a moment in Six of Crows where she's very stressed out and she has this moment of her goals being kind of focused and then what she wants to do with the rest of her life. And do you feel like you had that moment with like writing?
Oh wow. Yes, but and I wish I could point to what all of the forces that came together to make that happen. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you, I can point to I had come back from this trip where I'd had the idea for Shadow and Bone. But instead of being like, oh, I'm going to write this book, all I thought was, well, I've tried to write books before, and I've never gotten more than a few chapters in, so why bother? It's going to be one more thing you start and don't finish. Like, I did not believe in myself at all by that point. And I was on the phone with my friend Michelle Chihara, and she was like, you should reapply to the MFA, and I was thinking, I don't want to go to graduate school, I just want to write a book, and I suddenly made a deal with myself. I said, I'm going to get off the phone, and I'm going to outline this book, and I'm going to write it in the next 6 months. I'm going to write it before my next birthday. And as it turned out, it took me 2 months after that, but that was sort of the moment. And it was really like I had reached this point where I was in a really bad relationship, I was in a career that I didn't feel like I was very good at, and that I didn't really love, like it was depression, it was a trade, and I was dead broke. And I was like, I am doing this. I am doing this, and I guess that was my climb and edge moment. So, and honestly, I think writing that book really brought me back to myself and reminded me of who I was. Yeah.
From what I've heard, because obviously it's
that
like
was a very Oprah moment.
Yeah. Do you feel like with Six of Crows that you put elements of yourself in a lot of the characters? Because obviously people talk about Kaz and you frequently, but the other characters, like with this Inej moment, do you feel like each of them kind of has a bit of you in a way?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of inevitable, and I think that when you find those moments where you find what you have in common with a character, or you find some emotional place to enter in with a character that you maybe weren't aware of, that to me is like sort of necessary for writing those characters. And actually in Crooked King, there's a moment Wylan has where he's talking about sort of the critical voice in his head, and it was very much my experience, and very much my experience as a writer. You know, don't bother trying, don't bother doing this. You're not up to the task, and the fear of trying new things that comes along with it. So yeah.
Awesome. So one of the questions that I had came up during your Unlikable Female Protagonist panel, and I was thinking, some of my favorite characters are Kaz and the Dark Knight. Do you think if those characters were female, they would get the response and the fan response that they've gotten? Or is it that they're allowed to be that bad because they are men?
I think now, there would be more of that. I think we're seeing a rise in female anti-heroes and villains. I think, a character like, is it Elizabeth with Salazar? The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I think Adelina from the Young Elites. I think Jacqueline Carey has a series, She Was Dark, that has a very powerful female antagonist. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of books where I'll see a female villain, but she seems unhinged. You know, she's not like a planner. She isn't like cool, calm, and collected. She's like,
right.
You know, or she's driven by something. They always wanted a baby or something. It's always like this backstory.
And getting back at a man or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I was in love and he betrayed me.
Right.
You know, and I'm like, and it's not that those aren't legitimate motives. It's just I see it a lot. Like I see it a lot. So yeah, I think we're seeing more of that. And in fact, in my new series that I'm going to be writing that's set at Yale, I think it's fair to call the heroine.
So great to hear. They're my favorite. They are my favorite. I know. So speaking of fandom and fan responses, you're very active with your fandom. You know, you're on Tumblr, you're on Twitter, and there's this new kind of blurred line with social media and fandom and stuff like that. So how do you kind of maintain that balance of being active, not necessarily looking at bad reviews, you know, not being an over-involved author because then you get criticized for that? Like, how do you walk that line?
I don't know, honestly. No, really. It's like nobody hands you a guidebook to this. And there are definitely times where I feel like where that line breaks down, or where I stepped over it, or where I you just don't see it coming. And I always compare being online to sort of like walking down a hallway and everybody's like, high five, high five, high five, I love you, high five. And then every so often somebody just falls back and punches you in the face.
Right. Yeah.
And you're like, damn, where did that come from? And what you remember is not all the high fives. What you remember is being punched in the face.
Absolutely.
And it makes you a lot more cautious about getting online again and engaging in it. And honestly, sometimes I just have to step away. And sometimes that has nothing to do with what I'm experiencing from readers or from, it has to do with needing to sort of protect this creative headspace and forget that anybody's ever going to read what I'm writing, which for me is sort of an important part of the process.
Yeah, and everyone needs that kind of break from it, because even if it's not about writing or the fandom or anything, like, online can be very scary intense at times, and you kind of have to be like, sometimes I have to take a second.
I think we have this bad habit where when we get something negative online, our response is not to go offline, it's to stay online hoping that we're going to get some kind of positive feedback so that it resets us. And I don't think that works. And I guess it is very much a double-edged sword, but I also feel like it's dangerous to think of yourself as one of the feminists. And I think about this a lot in terms of diversity discussions, you know, that it's very easy to start to be like, well, I'm okay.
Right.
And no, you're not. Like, there's a good chance you're not. And you're going to find some mess to walk into, or you're going to make a mistake or get something wrong. And I also feel like, you know, whenever people are like, well, that's not an unproblematic fave, I'm like, this week. But you never know what next week is.
I mean, every fave is a problematic fave because people are problematic. Yeah, and you're going to have some kind of issue at some point.
And do something stupid or do something offensive.
Right.
Like Suppa was talking today about the fact that like the worst kind of racism isn't not the worst kind, but that the kind of racism we're used to understanding is like the over-the-top, explicit racism. That's the same kind of sexism we're used to. It's the same kind of lookism we're used to, the same kind of ableism we're used to. But there are small ways, things that we internalize and absorb. It took me a long time to start using pain because I had absorbed all of these ideas of how shameful somehow that would be or how unattractive that would be. And it really took me like getting over that and being like, that's stuff I've absorbed and then I'm perpetuating by doing this.
There is a lot of ideas, and I want to talk to you a little bit about like disability and disease and stuff, because I'm a young adult cancer survivor, and so I have a lot of feelings about how people with illnesses and disabilities are kind of depicted, and we do talk a lot about like racism and sexism and stuff, but I feel like we're still haven't quite broken that boundary of talking about disease and disability in a way that is still very inclusive. And you have this, like, especially with sick people, I don't know if you get this at all, but you're like, be strong, you're so, you're an inspiration to us as this, like, disabled person. And I still feel like we haven't broken that yet, and I'm looking forward to it. And I feel like with Paz, that has been, even for me as someone who doesn't have a disability but had, like, an illness, when I was reading the series, it was very good to see, like, somebody who's embracing this and is like, I can be a flawed human and not be an inspiration to you because I'm sick or disabled.
Oh, I like that.
So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I do think it's sort of all of a piece of this idea that we have out there that adventure and romance and that all of these things somehow belong to only one type of person. And I've talked about this in terms of like writing Shadow and Bone and sort of not even realize that I was walking into this idea. But that somehow these stories only belong to people who are, white and straight and beautiful and able-bodied. And like that is not true. And the world does not bear that out. And unfortunately people waste a lot of their lives thinking that those stories can't belong to them, and sometimes they don't step up and seize those stories, or because one, we live in a culture that denies them that, but also because it's harder, right? It's harder to see those things for ourselves, and I think it's doubly hard when you don't see it in fiction,
right?
Because you don't have that inspiration.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I would love to be a part of changing that, and I hope that can be. And I don't think I realized how I think we still are in a state where we kind of use tragedy,
absolutely,
and we use disability, and we use mental issues and aneurotypical conditions as plot fodder.
Yes. And
I think it's going to take a little while to get past that.
I definitely think that right now we're still in the, either it's angst and tragedy or you're an inspiration and there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
So you either, are only one way or the other. So I'm looking forward to narratives moving. And I think they are moving in that direction, but it's just a slow process.
And I think the more own voices authors we have writing these stories, the more we're going to see that.
Absolutely.
Because they are actually lived experiences, as opposed to like, oh, I saw this in another book or another TV show, and so I'm going to echo this.
Yeah.
What I think is this character's journey. And when I wrote Kaz, you know, I was writing, I didn't really think about it actively at the time, but I was basically writing the kind of cripple I wanted to be, which was one that terrifies people.
Right.
So
that's the goal.
That's the goal. But that, you know, who was in no way diminished, and who could have this be part of her story without it being something that other people got to decide what it meant.
Right.
So yeah,
very much defining your own story. I did read something about the Dothraki language, and you actually having like a word. I think it's ghost.
I have 2 words.
Do you?
I do.
Do you?
Yeah. So way back when I went to a World's Con, and I went to this was before Game of Thrones was on, and I went to a presentation on Dothraki that David Peterson was doing, and he asked for volunteers, and like for the first like 5 volunteers, it was like read this word or do this thing, and then he brought me up and he was like read this paragraph in Dothraki, and it was totally like I was totally the punchline, but I did my best, and he was so kind, and so everybody else kind of got like okay, whereas I got like boot or pot, and I got ghost, like the person whose spirit is unable to travel on into the afterlife, and it's actually been used in the show a couple of times.
Yeah, I remember hearing it, but I never realized.
And David and his wife and I became friends, and Aaron actually helped to plan a couple of my launch parties in LA, and you should follow them both on Tumblr because they're amazing. It's This Allegra and Daedalus, and they're really great, especially because they frequently like reblog, don't you? It's adorable. But then he introduced me at the Lumen Rising launch party, and he surprised me by making a verb in High Valyrian, which is the other language in Game of Thrones. The verb to write is actually based on my last name.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So with that kind of
Really
thing,
geeky. Really cool.
do you have anything with your books where you kind of have Easter eggs for someone else?
Oh my god, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah. Many of the characters are named after friends of mine. Morgan Fahey, who named Six of Crows. She came up with the title for Six of Crows. Obviously lent her name to Jesper. Kiti Gafar, who does a bunch of the design work on all like the swag and merch I give away. She lent her last name to an end. Yeah. So I mean, I love to do that. I love to build in those things, and I also put in Hamilton references.
Right, I know the Hamilton, as little Easter eggs.
Yeah, just every so it's not like I don't go out of my way to do it, but these are also kind of the way that you keep yourself going when you're working. Like you know, to a certain extent, when we write, it's important to stay engaged and stay entertained by what we do. And so there are jokes in my books and moments in my books that probably don't mean anything to anybody except me, but I enjoy them. Right? So yeah. And when you have to edit that 500-page book a second time, you're like, oh,
that was clever.
Yeah.
So people have bonded very strongly with the characters in your series, and is there any characters that you would have loved to have had as a teen, like that you've read now and you've been like, oh, I wish I would have had this character?
Nina. I really didn't believe growing up. You know, I've struggled with my weight my whole life. It goes up, it goes down, blah, blah, blah. And I really did not believe that you could be happy and successful and loved and like desired, like as a plus size woman or a round woman or a thick woman or whatever you want to call us. Because I had been taught that in my family and in culture, repeated again and again. Like that. This is what you are most valued for. It's for looking like a particular kind of person. And I really wish I'd had Nina because it's such a lie. It's just not true. Like, I do fine. You know, like, I do okay. And like, I've had a wonderful life, and I get to go on incredible adventures, and I literally have my dream job, and nobody gives a damn if I have cellulite on my thighs. You know, and that to me is so important. Like, you know, like I wish I could have believed that growing up.
And I love that that's reflected with Nina because she's described as like the most beautiful one even in the crew, and she's built like, you know, like from a ship and just is gorgeous. And the fan art too, I'm really proud of the fans for drawing her accurately because I was so terrified that she's going to come back soon. And when we saw everything, I just was like, this is perfect. I'm so happy for everybody to do this.
It makes me, and I have so many kids come through my line, men and women, who love her for that reason. And I think also just because she enjoys her life. Yeah. And I think we're really taught, like, you know, that you're supposed to wait, you know? you know, you go on that trip when you're gonna look good in the pictures. You know, you get married when you do this. You're gonna start dating when you do that. You're gonna, you know, stay home. Stay home. Be afraid. You know, and I think it's just, you know, I think it's important to remember that those are the voices that are trying. They're afraid of you. They're afraid of what you might do if you're not afraid anymore.
Yeah, and she lives her life in the moment.
Yes.
So my last question is just congrats on Night House. Very excited when I saw that. So each series, I feel like your characters have gotten, not mature, because I feel like YA characters can be mature, but they've kind of gotten a little more, a little extra. So how is that, like, has that been an intentional transition for you? Did you know you were going to
No.
Or you just kind of, it's just been a nice, natural kind of...
You know, I think that Night House was actually the first story that I pitched to my agent, Joanna Volpe, when I signed with her, when I sold her Shadow, or I didn't sign, when she took on Shadow and Bone and took me on as a client. And we just didn't know where it fit. You know, it was a college story. College stories can be kind of a hard sell. They're not quite where they belong. We don't know. And I definitely didn't feel, at that time, I wasn't even thinking about writing for adults. And then I think that somehow just everything aligned. Like all of a sudden people were paying attention to books like Discovery of Witches and Magicians. And there was like, oh, maybe there's a space for this. And Joe and I were trying to figure out, like, when am I going to do this? Because I had taken on all of these projects. And then it just happened very quickly. I ended up pitching it to Noah Eaker at Random House. Like, he's incredible. He was with Ellen Link and David Mitchell. And and then he just went for it. So, but yeah, I don't think it was like a deliberate move. I intended to keep writing YA. I have YA projects coming up, but this, I always knew it just was shaped like an adult story. It's hard for me to explain why.
Yeah. And how has been that transition, I guess, writing, when you're so used to like YA, how has been the transition to writing for adults and having that kind of mindset? Or do you not really think of it that way? Because I don't get the impression that you think that you're writing for kids, you know?
You know, to me it's the same as thinking about like, what kind of story is it? You know, like, I mean, when you start a book, I think that you have this kernel of an idea, and really when it's ready to kind of become more than that, you start to see, you know, it's kind of like you're zoomed out on a planet, and then as you get closer, you sort of see the oceans and the seas and what it is, and is it inhabitable, and kind of all these details. And I think that's the same thing that's true for me as when I engage with a book, and sort of beginning to understand what kind of POV it's going to be written in. Is it going to be linear in one timeline? Is it going to be multiple POV? And is it going to be 1 book, 2 books, 10 books? And so to me, it's sort of all part of the shape of, it's like I'm molding it. I'm like, and then I do this, and it has a handle and a face. But I'm trying to shape this story in my head and kind of get a grip on it. So, I don't know. It's a little anxiety provoking, because I'm kind of like, am I, you know, like YA has been my home for so long. It's a very comfortable place for me, but I honestly believe the story dictates these things, and when you start thinking too much about the market or about the audience, you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me here at Yallfest, and it was just a pleasure, such an honor for me, so thank you so much.
And thank you for doing so much to talk about the book.
Absolutely. I feel like every time somebody reads the Grisha Trilogy, because for me, like an angel gets its wings, you know, like that's honestly how I feel.
Gets its wings.
Yes, exactly. So thank you guys all for watching, and I will see all of you guys soon. Bye.